I'm Krista Tippett of the On Being Project and the On Being podcast, and I'm excited to be here with Lulu Miller, my partner in crime in radio, who has also written a wonderful book called Why Fish Don't Exist. And as we get into that and what this beautiful exploration she did has to do with the world we're living in, I'm going to read a little bit, Lulu, from the very first lines. Picture the person you love the most. Chaos will get them. Chaos will crack them from the outside with a falling branch, a speeding car, a bullet, or unravel them from the inside with the mutiny of their very own cells. Chaos will rot your plants and kill your dog and rust your bike. It will decay your most precious memories, topple your favorite cities, wreck any sanctuary you can ever build. It's not if, it's when. Chaos is the only sure thing in this world, the master that rules us all. My scientist father taught me early that there is no escaping the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is only growing. It can never be diminished, no matter what we do. A smart human accepts this truth. A smart human does not try to fight it. So here we are in a year that has become 2020. And this book traces how this way of seeing the world was formed you from the very beginning of your life. And it also explores the limitations of this way of moving through the world. And I'm so curious to hear how you would start thinking about how this exploration is infusing the way you are living through our rupturing, unfolding world right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Krista. It is truly surreal to be here with you. Like really, really nerve-wracking and surreal. You have been not just a legend in our world, but someone who has given me as you can tell from that introduction, at times depressive, terrified, atheist, a lot of help along the way as an adult person. So it's really cool to be talking to you. And yeah, I mean, basically this book started out almost 10 years ago as an exploration, honestly, as a craving for an antidote to the feeling of chaos. I grew up with this kind of hilarious, nihilistic atheist father who was taking every chance he could to sort of shove it down our throats, my sisters and I, that there's no point to anything, there's no meaning, there's no God, there's no afterlife, you're about, chaos made you and will kill you quickly. So go live your life. And it's like the carpe diem side of that is, if we're all going to go and there's no point, go do what you want, take the risk, have fun. Yeah. He kind of was this like moralistic, he is a moralistic kind of hedonist. And so on some days, I thought, if I just accept that, I'll be like Dad, I'll be happy and present and kind of connected with the world. And on some days that worked, but then on other days, I think when just the world throws its tougher blows or is cruel in certain ways, that thought could really darken things, as I think it can for everybody. Well, if the point of life is nothing except to taste it, and tasting it feels horrible, that could quickly transmute to why stay. And I think, I get the sense that people who are raised with faith, certain faith, at times when they have the question why stay, they encounter a barrier in their mind because it's forbidden to go, or because if you stay there might be heaven. And I think that at that moment I would sometimes encounter like a slide with light saying, there's no point to any of this, so why stay? And so that was just this personal, at times sort of, even like shameful question to walk around with. And I do have to say, especially in this moment, that is one of the key questions of the book, like a white girl wondering whether to stay against the context of Black lives who don't even have the choice, whose lives are being taken. I have to say that question itself comes from a huge place of privilege. But I do think depression is kind of an equal opportunity employer and does affect people. And we see, people struggling with exhaustion right now. And anyway, so that question was sort of, is at the heart of this book, which is in many ways just the story of a scientist. And I think where I came out at the end of it, I wanted an antidote to chaos, to those feelings, to that destruction. And I think where I came out at the end was realizing, no, the way forward is to embrace that chaos, and to squint at it differently. And we can talk more about that, but my relationship to chaos itself, I think, changed by the end, in part because of this guy who the book is.
Well, and you set out, you kind of had an object of your fixation. And there's a story in here about stories we never heard. And let me just say it this way. I think what you have been pursuing and starting to look for and really turning over all kinds of interesting rocks and looking for is the very way we have thought about order and made order and trusted in order. And that also feels so resonant to me. This year, even, twice. I mean, going through the pandemic, the lockdown, feeling like in that moment, understanding that we have a world to remake. In part, for many reasons, but in part around the way we had this civilizational moment of defining what is essential and non-essential and realizing we hadn't organized our world to value what we call essential. And then, of course, moving into this rupture, this racial, what I hope is an awakening, that also absolutely challenges the way we've structured our life together. And it feels to me like you have been on this quest to think about science as a participant in that, both as a companion to that kind of inquiry, also understanding the limits of science in that inquiry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so the book is about this man, David Starr Jordan, who's a taxonomist. His day job is to make order. Taxonomy is the profession that tries to find the hidden order of life, how things are created on the evolutionary tree. And he sort of was trained in this idea that there was actually a moral hierarchy in nature. He had a teacher, Louis Agassiz, who told him that God had created creatures and plants in a specific order, and that the higher up they are on this ladder, the better they are, the closer to God. And the work of taxonomy was to figure out the thoughts of God. David Starr Jordan would eventually sort of let go of that idea when he came to accept Darwin, but actually it insidiously still clung to him. And he came to believe that time had still forged an objective, scientifically objective order in nature among creatures and eventually among humans.
And I would say that idea infuses the modern world we inherited.
Absolutely. And I think that was such an important lesson, that we think, we look back maybe on some of these measures they used to use, that posture revealed godliness, that, humans stood upright facing heaven, as they called it, whereas fish lay prostrate in the ground. And we think we're beyond that kind of idea, but we just use different measures, and they're just rampant. We see it with COVID. Someone might not be as likely to get a ventilator if they have pre-existing conditions. And what does that mean? What created those pre-existing conditions? Who are we leaving out on what we're creating these hierarchies all the time. They are entrenched in our law. There's still stuff on the books about how certain kinds of people are legally allowed to get sterilized.
Right. And David Starr Jordan, and I have to confess I hadn't heard his name before. If I had, I hadn't memorized it.
Yeah.
I was very surprised when I got to the point where he becomes the founding president of Stanford University.
Yeah, and he was huge there. He was there for over a decade, and there's still a big building named after him, and he was remembered in many ways in a really positive, sunny light, because he happened to be so prolific at catching fish, and he was apparently a very charming and passionate educator. Right. But he advanced this idea of an order among humans more and more in his life. And yeah, I mean, this book really ends up being basically an exploration of the dangers of the lust for order. And on one hand, like this desire to name things, to group things into categories, it's so primal.
Yes.
Like we need it a little bit, but it can
Yeah.
really lead us astray. And for me, one of the biggest discoveries of the book was even the word order itself. It comes from the
Yes.
Latin ordenum, which means which was for a loom. It's the way that threads sit in a loom in an organized way, and that itself is also so violent and fabricated. Like we stuff things together, we stuff threads together. It began to be used metaphorically for the way that like people in a army may sit under a king or ruler in an order that we've created. And it was only extended to nature in the 1700s. It was like this superimposition that there is any hierarchy to find there. And I think one of the most important things that we can do with our fleeting time is to just remember that any order is fabricated. Behind every ruler, there's a rule.
There's some line that you have.
Yeah.
Every category is at best a proxy, at worst a shackle.
Right. And I think, some of these ideas can seem really abstract and, woo, why do fish not exist? Who cares about a taxonomist? But these categories are just, they're all around us. And we take things for granted all the time about, whether, who deserves a loan, who deserves to go to a school. These are categorical, value judgments that we're placing on the world. And I think just walking around aware that order is fabricated, and it's our job to be curious about the mistakes we're making and the inconsistencies and the nuance that we're obscuring with these proxies, with these labels.
And that something that we constructed, we can deconstruct and reconstruct.
Right. And that this moment, disorder all around, protest, rebellion, riot, like this is the moment. This is a moment of so much potential. And to realize, that like it is the job, especially for people sitting near the top of that hierarchy, to listen and to embrace like what are the messages, coming from people who are unfairly trapped in a very, crushed by this fabricated order, and to sort of, even when discomfort and disorder might intuitively in our body feel really bad, like just to realize, oh my gosh, this is the path forward. This is the best thing. And so that has definitely reframed this moment. I would like to think I'd be curious already. Like I would like to think that, but I do think sitting around and thinking about the dangers of order for almost 10 years has made me at the very least curious about the dangerously constructed orders in my own mind and in my own life. As a journalist, what hierarchies am I making? What I've been thinking a lot about, even just what I have been taught and have come to believe makes a good story, and what has that been leaving out, and where do I need to do work there?
I'd like to talk to you about that for an hour. Yeah. Would you so one kind of big discovery that, again, well, maybe this is part of the story. Why was this not a headline? Why was this not on the front page? That fish do not exist. Describe that discovery, how that is true.
It is so bonkers. Okay, so this isn't me being a woo-woo lady.
No, this is you being a science reporter.
But it's been well accepted in scientific circles since the 1980s. This is not a controversial idea. So basically, here's what it is. Fish, what I'm saying is that the category of fish as a scientifically meaningful category is just absolutely a bunk category. It does not exist. It's not meaningful in the same way that birds actually is meaningful. Mammals actually is meaningful. But if we're talking about creatures that are related to each other, all groups of all descendants of one ancestor with no extras, fish is no good. And so it's like saying, all creatures that are loud and purple is a group. Like, sure, fish is a category you can make, but it doesn't tell you much about actual evolutionary closeness.
But what they have in common that we can observe, that we have let absolutely define our sense of their place in the universe, is very superficial.
Yeah. So basically, swimming in the water in these costumes of scales and tails.
Right.
There are creatures far more closely related, for example, to us or to a cow than they are to one another. And when you start to really accept that and look that in the face, you realize, okay, so I've got two options. I can either say that all those other creatures should be included in fish. So throw a cow in, throw your mom in, that, those are fish. Or the more useful thing to say is that fish is not a meaningful category. It never was. It's a category we sort of gerrymander certain things together and put things that don't belong to preserve a sense of distance from creatures that we like to think of as lower than us. Whereas beneath those scales are sort of more all kinds of complexity than we may not realize. There's cognitive complexity, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, it's just like a bunk gerrymandered category.
Yeah, and of course, reading it right now in this moment, it's like race, right? Race is also a human invention, a construct, but such a powerful construct around which we have shaped and actually distorted ourselves, our bodies, our minds, and our structures. And I found the story you're telling, and this way that science, I think what's great about science actually, there's just not every scientist in a moment of having what they work to prove disproven, but there is this excitement about hitting a limit and learning that you have a whole new set of questions to ask and a whole new world of discovery to walk into. Yeah. And that's then, in this different civilizational context, I feel like this is a story for our time.
Yeah, I would hope so. It is, and like I'm using it for myself as just the reminder of, okay, Lulu, you are riddled with blind spots. And like, what do you need to learn right now? What do you need to change? What order do you need to take down? In the book, I focus more on the connection between fish and the concept of unfit, which was a term eugenicists used to sterilize.
Well, and eugenics is in this story of David Starr Jordan too.
Hugely, yeah.
Which means it's inside our cultural story, and of all the things we're taking apart right now to examine, I feel like that's a thread that we haven't named.
Yeah, absolutely. And just this concept of, what words do we slap on the world? Like they were using this term unfit to just talk about a catch-all of people that largely white male people didn't think should be around. And so that could be someone with,
or have babies.
Right. Yeah. And they're sort of, all kinds of different ideas were discussed, including legalizing polygamy for the rich white upper classes. The eugenicists entertained all kinds of ideas, and the American eugenicists settled on this path of sterilization, which they saw as the humane way of basically cutting off a lifeline. They saw that as the humane alternative to extermination, which was a word that was used a lot. And yeah, in that category was just all kinds of things. It had this very sober Darwinian sounding term, unfit. And then inside was just people who they didn't like. And that could be anything from someone with disabilities, someone with epilepsy, someone with a criminal background, someone who had a low score on a standardized test that was fabricated by the people in power. And it was just this messy judgmental idea that they stuffed into a scientific sounding suit. And again, that's not gone. That's not gone from our laws. No. Now we use terms maybe like mentally incapacitated or unable to give informed consent, but these things are still with us.
Or really, I think you could also see it kind of embedded in the way in what our prisons have become.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
This sense of human beings who are disposable.
Yeah.
Who are ruined and not worth treating as human beings.
And there's so many, like word choice. You had Resmaa Menakem on the show recently, and how he uses the word cages to really drive that point. And Ruthie Wilson, popular, huge prison abolitionist and police abolitionist, just the reminder, like, these are cages, and that when you can change a word or look under, what are the assumptions under a word, and look at the words we're using. Yeah, there is a lot. I mean, there's just, it feels like if anything, there's just this question of why now? Why do white people care now? And if anything, I think it just feels hopeful, but it also feels, I don't know if you share this, like as a white person, just, it feels shameful to be so late.
Yeah.
But there is change, and I think the path forward is just a real openness to every word we are using, every assumption we believe in what creates order in society, because that, as people have been saying for a long, long time, needs a profound rethinking.
Yes, it's shameful. It's so many things, and we have to work with it, and we have to walk forward, and we have to reimagine the future and remake the world. And I think part of the story you tell is how very much we have crafted the world, and how we do that with our words and with our categories, that there's a power to those things that we could also claim in a generative way.
Right. It can be, words are destructive and they're generative. They are not inert, but they can be all things. And that is so beautiful to, thank you. Yeah.
I wonder, one other thing as we close, or as we wind down. So this is also a story of us in which optimism, I think, as you say, as a shield, does not fare well. But you did come out, and I actually don't like the word optimism. I think it's kind of wishful thinking. I like thinking about hope as something muscular, a choice that works with reality. And you came out, and I think this is the way you come at it, with the Dandelion Principle, which is a way to work with the science, to work with the reality of chaos, and to live your life, and to claim life. So tell us about the Dandelion Principle, so the rest of us can walk around with it.
Yeah, this is the thing to end on. I wish I brought you some dandelions, but the great thing is they're all around, always there to remind us of this. So the Dandelion Principle is this idea for what is essentially a very basic philosophical concept of relativity, which is that to a gardener, a dandelion may appear like a weed, a thing to be culled and thrown away. But to a chef, for instance, it may be a little bite of peppery deliciousness in a salad. To a painter, it might be a pigment. To an herbalist, it might be a way of soothing digestive ailments. It's this idea that they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, worth is in the eye of the exploiter, perhaps, or a better way to say it is just that worth is always subjective. And I think that as we walk around considering what we value, what we discount, just to have the knowledge that there may be value beyond our comprehension. And that, actually, funnily enough, Darwin writes about this. He talks, he warns humans about the infallibility of, man's ability to see the value of nature. And he says, man can only act on appearances, nature can act on the whole machinery of life. And he strongly urges against meddling, and just this sense that there is a deeper connectivity, that things may have value that we might not be able to perceive, that our eye is incredibly short-sighted. And at the end of the day, our strongest ingredient as a society is variety, is diversity. And you see that, of course, playing out in so many places, biodiverse ecosystems.
Yeah. But also in being so humble towards even what really, for all kinds of objective, seemingly rational reasons, appears so insignificant.
Yes.
Would you read, in closing, from page 191, the passage that starts, "On Neptune it rains diamonds"?
Sure. Okay, here we go. Oh, and I do feel compelled to say, the wonderful artist Kate Samworth made illustrations, one for every chapter. So, all right, here we go. On Neptune, it rains diamonds. It really does. Scientists figured that out just a few years ago. The longer we examine our world, the stranger it proves to be. Perhaps there will be a mother waiting inside a person deemed unfit. Perhaps there will be medicine inside a weed, salvation inside the kind of person you had discounted. When I give up the fish, I get, at long last, that thing I had been searching for. A mantra, a trick, a prescription for hope. I get the promise that there are good things in store, not because I deserve them, not because I worked for them, but because they are as much a part of chaos as destruction and loss. Life, the flip side of death. Growth of rot.
So chaos also untangles itself. And the chaos, what feels to us like chaos, is a new kind of order. And we are participants in that.
Yeah, we are. And that, right, as you were saying, our words, they can be horribly destructive and they can be profoundly generative. And we can change our words. We can change our systems. We actually can use our fleeting time on Earth to reconstruct a world order and to like the way, I mean, another thing I personally don't believe exists is a cosmic, a moral arc that pushes or pulls toward justice. I don't think it's there. Growing up, I used to actually think by cherry picking a few moments in history that evolution somehow guaranteed this slow march toward better. I really don't anymore. But I do believe our words are the things, the bricks that construct it. Our actions are the things that can change things. And so it's not there, and that's haunting. It is not guaranteed. But then that reframes, for me, honestly the haunting question of the beginning. There's no point. Yeah, there really is. Like, your stupid tongue has the ability to create an alchemy with the words you say, like Black Lives Matters has been saying for a long time. Say it, and maybe slowly, eventually, the idea becomes real. And so, yeah, that I think that is our job. That is why this time does matter.
Thank you, Lulu. And thanks to Aspen Ideas for bringing us together.
Thank you so much.